There's a statistic that of all the new technologies that are introduced within a year, 30% of that is already out of date. So going to university and learning everything no longer works, because actually by the time you've finished your degree, much of the things that you could have learned in that time are already out of date, and there's a lot of new things that you have to learn. So it needs a new approach to how we learn. So you hear about lifelong learning, and I think that's the mindset that we need to bring to the workplace and how we are ourselves.
Hi everyone, welcome to the High Performance Teams podcast, episode 4. Today we will talk with Colin Mansell, who is the founder and CEO of Skills Union, a Singapore-based platform that helps companies to hire and develop world-class tech teams. We will be talking about a really hot topic today, which is the skills gap at the workplace. Colin, I'm really happy having you at the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Good. Okay, so tell us about your story.
My story, that's from the very beginning. So I'm from an international background. Dutch parents, moved around a lot, Southeast Asia, Norway. Moved to London when I was 10, so saw a lot of the world at a young age. And then spent sort of the first 10 years of my career working in London during the time that the music industry was being turned upside down. And so my first job was actually working with record companies when Napster was a thing. So this is before MySpace and before the iPod had come out. So I was really at that interesting time where the internet was causing all these major shifts to the music industry. And you could see how much the internet was going to have an impact in other industries. So the first 10 years of my career worked with record companies, then some media companies, worked with a consulting company that worked with the BBC when they were trying to figure out how do you put the TV on the internet. Worked with News International, who there's the Times and the Sun, so they're trying to figure out like how do you put newspapers on the internet. So it's really at the dawn of this great new medium that is the internet. And then moved to Canada 10, 12 years ago, built an agency that grew to Vancouver, Toronto, New York, sold that to my business partners, then started a school that was looking at this digital skills gap that we'll be talking about today. And then sort of when I hit 40, I spent a year on sabbatical looking at how education and especially skills education was creating economic impact in emerging economies. So I spent some time in Africa and then came to Singapore just before COVID, so really 2.5 years ago, and then have been working here with NTU and a number of some of the tech employers to look at this digital skills gap. So that's me in a nutshell.
Very good. Okay, so today we're going to talk about skills. So let's first start by understanding, so what is a skill? What are the types? And also there's some misconception between skill and knowledge.
So I think that's a big thing of our time, right? Like they talk about the skills gap, and and much of this has to do with technology and the speed at which things are changing. So I think in my dad's generation, he was an engineer, so he still is an engineer, he's a retired engineer. But in that generation, you went to university and then you had one job, usually with the same company for your whole life. And it was really about the knowledge that you would have built up at university. That's then what you needed to know to go and do your job. So in engineering, it's like all the things you learn about metals and rocks and whatever else engineers learn about. And then you'd need to apply that throughout your career. And now it's actually much more about the skills economy. So it's about, can you do software engineering? Do you know this software? And those are things that you do rather than what you know. And so the way that I think this is described in academic literature is that knowledge is what you could call declarative content. So declarative means things like, in the example of like language would be the vocabulary. So these are things that we need to remember. They're not things that we do. The other skill is also called procedural knowledge. So it's like what you do. And that's where we're seeing the big gap in today's world is like, it's not so much about what did you learn at university, it's like what can you actually do in the job. And I think the skills bit keeps changing very quickly. So new technologies, new platforms, there's cloud, there's cyber, there's AI, there's all of these things that are coming at us, and you can't really learn it in the traditional model of, you go to university and you learn AI, and in 20 years that's going to be the same. So I think that's the really interesting thing now is about how fast can you learn skills versus knowledge, which is really available in our supercomputer in our pocket, as we have all human knowledge at our fingertips.
Yeah.
It's what can we do with that knowledge in the form of skills. That's really what's changing at speed in the world today.
So let's go in that direction. So what is the context? What is happening in terms of skills today at the workplace?
I mean, I think going back to where I started in my career is that the internet caused this shift from going to really a linear speed. So, like technological advancement in the 19th century was really, the telephone or the TV or the radio. And then it would sort of take, 20 or 30 years for that technology to be fully adopted. Like cars took maybe 100 years before that was like hitting, 70, I don't know quite where we are, but maybe sort of 60 or 70% of the world having access to that. The internet took like 10 years, like new technology platforms like TikTok we were just talking about, literally within a year can reach billions of people. So the speed at which things are happening is no longer linear, it's exponential. So the technology that supports all of those things is also moving at an exponential speed, which means that there's a statistic that of all the new technologies that are introduced within a year, 30% of that is already out of date. So going to university and learning everything no longer works, because actually by the time you've finished your degree, much of the things that you could have learned in that time are already out of date, and there's a lot of new things that you have to learn. So it needs a new approach to how we learn. So you hear about lifelong learning, and I think that's the mindset that we need to bring to the workplace and how we are ourselves develop our careers, is really to be thinking about how do I pick up new skills, how do I keep learning, and how do I keep pace so that I'm not automated and put on the old heap of what's no longer needed, and in that sort of retired technologies, and how do I stay current and stay ahead of what's coming.
So in order to better understand, do you have some other stats for us to understand really what's the context today?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's statistics that 50% of the world's employees require significant reskilling right now, and that's the World Economic Forum data. That it's now 95% of all employers expect their staff to pick up new skills on the job, and that was 65% in 2018. So like the speed at which it's changing isn't like decades. We're talking in this decade, we're going from what's kind of called the skills gap to skills crunch to skills crisis, where actually another interesting stat is that there's 85 million unfilled jobs by 2030 unless we radically transform the way in which we're addressing the skills gap.
So now let's wow, that's really crazy. So let's understand. So what's happening today at the organizations? How they are handling that?
Yeah, so I think the interesting thing is how to address the skills gap. You can do it in one of two ways. One is you hire new people, or you develop the people that you already have. And I think most organizations, they have lots of time for hiring new people, and that's actually what's causing this vast chasm of skills gap, is that people are hiring new people and they're not really able to do so. There's over 1 million open software engineering positions just in North America. 1 million, right? And there's only 300 million people in North America, or maybe a little bit more, but it shows that's just within software engineering. So it's not data science, cloud, cyber. In technology, we're talking about millions and millions of open job positions that can't be filled. And then on the other side of like, how do you train people? That's perhaps where companies should be spending their energy. But they're very slow to take it up, and the current models that they have are pretty ineffective, right? So this kind of goes back to declarative versus procedural. So the current learning platforms are things like Coursera or the MOOCs that were meant to solve the skills gap, but they are really just videos. And you can't really learn a skill from watching a video. In fact, the completion rates are like less than 5% or less than 3% on some of those courses. So there's a lot wrong with how we're trying to address the skills gap by upskilling people in organizations. And it's like any skill, right? If you were to learn driving by watching a video of somebody driving, you're not going to learn how to drive from that. And it's the same with software engineering or cloud or anything that you would learn as a skill. You need to learn it by doing it. You need to have interaction with an instructor. You need to often be in a social setting and have hands-on projects to work on. So that's really how we're thinking about that, is how do we bring a scalable model for skills development into organizations so that you're not just kind of hiring new people, but you're looking at the people that you have, or even people that are at the top of your hiring funnel and saying, well, how can we create on-ramp programs to address the skills gaps that we have in the organization.
So the companies that you are talking to, so what's their struggles today?
I mean, it goes back to that stat, 95% of all employers expect their own people to pick up new skills. And I think it depends on which study you look at, but I think talent development or talent shortage is kind of the number one or number two concern for in the high 90% of CEOs. So yeah, I mean, the talent gap, this talent crisis is, I think it's ever present, it's ubiquitous, it's all around the world. Every market you look at, there are challenges, and it's about how do you keep up with the rate of change.
So okay, we're going to go and understand what's the solution. But before, what's the cost of doing nothing?
Yeah, I mean, I used to run an agency, and we'd have like at our peak, we were like 25 people, 30 people, and there were always like 3 empty seats. And as a business, that's like 12-15% of your workforce is not adding value. You're not. And as a service business, typically you run at 15% margin. That's like a target. You could be slightly above, slightly below. So realistically, the empty seats means you're not producing that work, which means that you're not generating that revenue, which means you're basically running at break even instead of at your ideal, run rate of productivity. So I think the real cost to the economy is, it's unimaginably vast. It's like saying it's missed opportunity cost. That's the real issue. So if we could train people quicker, if organizations were to shift perhaps some of their recruitment budget into training budget and think more about how do I fill up those empty seats in my office or virtual, hybrid, whatever the office situation is now, that's really, it's your profit. That's the way to think about it as a business owner, it's like that final 10-15% workforce is getting that optimized is really how you generate profit, which allows you to grow. So there's so much that's, I think, being lost globally because of that gap.
Well, what have you observed? What are the top skills that are more hot right now, more in demand?
I mean, there's sort of the hard skills, which is software engineers, like chronically short globally. And then there's branches within that. There's cloud, right? So there's lots of cloud engineering positions that open. Cybersecurity is going to become a bigger and bigger issue. Within data, machine learning, AI, which are all in the group of family of roles. Again, we could have millions more people and still be short. But I think also on the soft skills is, and I think this gets described as sort of the horizontal skills and the vertical skills. And so horizontal is thinking about hard skills like learning Java or react, or a technology. And then the sort of more vertical skills are things like resilience and how do I learn to communicate, how do I develop empathy, how do I become a better manager. And actually, they say that you'll get a job through the hard skills, but you'll lose a job because of the soft skills. And if it's not you, it's people also leave because of managers. That's the other major reason. So it's like the development of skills for managers is also critically important if you want to build and grow your organization. And I think that, again, looking at World Economic Forum stats, they always say like these are the top 10 skills, and it's always like empathy, communication, problem solving. It's the soft skills that we're also needing to develop in our people.
And how do you see, like, what's the role of education, like universities, on building the skills that people need to succeed in the future? So what's happening now in that area?
Yeah, I think universities are struggling, because they play in, and I think what we've talked about this previously is sort of we've gone from, 50,000 foot view, we were hunter-gatherers for millions of years. Then about 5,000 years ago, we became farmers, right? So we started an agricultural economy, and really the average person went from hunting to farming. And then about 300 years ago, we went from the agricultural economy into the industrial economy. And that meant that everybody went from standing in a field to standing in a factory. But in today's world, we're actually in the information age. So there's very few people in fully, let's say, developed economies that are stood in factories. That's all been automated, and the robots are taking that over. And we're mostly working in offices or even in remote situations. So actually, we're now in the information age. And the university was really born in the industrial age. So there's still this, quite mechanical approach to saying, right, we need to prepare people for an industrial career, which would have meant you're doing a function within a large organization. You need to do that function really, really well. And what changes in the information age is actually organizations need to be agile. So it's not about being a big factory with lots of cogs doing their job really well. It's actually about how do I build a high-speed company that can evolve really quickly with the needs of the world today. So universities are struggling with that switching from, hey, we prepare people for 4 or 5 years and then we send them off into the world, to how do we support people for lifelong learning? And how do we keep up with the curriculum of today? How do we teach what is, Golang, or like what is the technology that just spiked in the last 12 months? And how do we develop a program for that? So I think it's very challenging for universities because they still have the committee structures, the government approval processes that can take months, even years, and that's problematic. So I think they're looking at new ways to engage with industry, looking at partnership models, looking at platforms, modularization of courses, new ways for certificates to be reimagined. So I think universities are going through huge changes at the moment, and we'll need to continue doing so to kind of keep up with this information age that we're now in.
Wow, there's a lot going. So it's not just universities. I mean, everyone is hard to keep the pace of the change, like technology. And what you say is it's about agility. It's about the speed that people learn and get the skills. And that's where the struggle. Okay, so I love this topic. I think there's a lot of people now discussing about this. So I'm really happy having this conversation with you. And so let's now look at the future. And if you look at the future, let's say in 10 years, how does the workplace look like for you? What do you see?
So I think technology is going to play more and more of a role, and it's sort of this, I think a lot of people think of like, the AI is coming, this kind of dystopian view of the future of like, we're all going to get replaced by robots. But of course, that's not really the reality. I think that humans and technology have always worked hand in hand. So from, the wheel, the fishing rod, you name it. Humans have always like worked in partnership with technology, and one doesn't function without the other. So I think we will become more and more augmented in our future with the technology. But in doing so, we have to pick up the technology skills. So it means learning the software, learning the technologies. There's an interesting statistic around I think it was 1950 or 1960, the average lifespan or the average age of an S&P 500 was like 60 years. So the average big company globally was old. And now it's like 18 years. So the biggest companies in the world are only 20 years old. So you're seeing that like agility being the real thing, right? Like, so, some people would say that the biggest company in the world in 2030 doesn't yet exist, right? It's being imagined somewhere in a boardroom or a garage somewhere, probably in an emerging economy that we're not, thinking of Silicon Valley. It's probably not. So I think the future, it's more technology augmented. I think mindsets need to also keep up with that. So it's like, how do we embrace that instead of fearing it? And I think that is a big piece for us. And I think it becomes more global and more remote. I think distributed teams, global companies that are not like we have an office in London or wherever, but actually we have a distributed team, and this is the thread that keeps us together is probably all online. And yeah.
So then, now let's move into solutions. Let's understand. So then what's the solution for that?
I mean, I think organizations are going to play a bigger role in the development of people. I think they've been, in an industrial economy, they're like, I don't care. You're a cog in a machine, go be a cog. And actually that's the industrial model. I think in an information age model is like, we don't need a machine. We need a morphing kind of biological organism that is responding to the inputs from its environment at speed, at like high rate of change. So actually what we need is a resilient organization that can respond quickly. So I would love to see, when we talk to companies like Google, they have enormous resources. They have internal coaches, mentors, leadership development, skills development, academies, you name it, it's there. But that's Google, who are the biggest, one of the biggest companies in the world, and companies like that will have all of that. But we should remember that actually 90% of the economy is small and medium-sized enterprise. So it's how do those organizations evolve? Because they represent the bulk of impact. So I think more models of personal development, both in the soft skills and in the hard skills, will get supported by organizations in recognizing that you can't just go out and keep trying to hire new people. And we kind of liken this to like health food versus, like actually if you train your people and think about the future, that's like healthy food and going to the gym. But most organizations are still like, yeah, but I'm hungry and I'm in McDonald's or something. So I want a hamburger, which is the equivalent metaphorically of like, let's just hire some new people and let's not invest too much. And I think that has to change if we're to address those sort of like the tens of millions or hundreds of millions of people that we need to retrain and reskill just in the next decade. Yeah.
And how is your company helping the customers?
Yeah, so I mean, we work with universities like NTU here in Singapore on these kind of hyper-relevant skills training programs. So looking at software engineering, product management, UX design, and how do universities respond more quickly to what is needed in industry today. And we also work with organizations in addressing the skills gap, both through hiring and through developing learning and development programs for their people. And it starts with a kind of very accurate assessment on, you could say, the quantitative view and the qualitative view. So quantitative being like, well, how many jobs do you need to fill, and what does that look like over the next 5 years? or even over the next 6 months in a lot of cases. And then qualitatively, what does each job need, and what are you seeing in your talent pool, and like what's the gap? So how do we bridge that gap with learning and development programs? Yeah, so
very okay. So let's say myself, I'm a CEO or I'm a HR director for my company. So what is your advice for me to do? What can I do today in my organization in terms of skills?
I mean, I think the old way of dealing with it is the performance management system, right? Is saying, and very often that stops with, we do an annual cycle, or we do maybe a quarterly cycle, like a lot of companies will do quarterly. Very few of them have moved to that fully agile, like continuous iteration, continuous improvement. And I think performance reviews are still quite industrial, of saying like, how well is this cog being a cog? And it doesn't get into like what could this cog become, or how could this evolve, and how could we develop this person to be more in tune with what they're going to be good at, and what's going to be useful for the organization, and building those learning and development plans. So I think it's far more effective to think about how do we develop people than do we grade them. And you've seen this in the school system as well, right? Like a lot of school systems are saying, actually, if we have all of our teachers going around giving people grades, they're not teaching or developing the students. So let's stop grading and let's just focus on teaching them. And it's a bit of a mindset shift to say, as a manager, my job is not just to say, you're a C+ and you're an A- or whatever it is, but it's what can I as a manager do to serve my people to make sure that they're developing at their optimum. So I think the shift is from, performance management to learning and development, and becoming a facilitator of learning. I think that's the big brushstroke of the change.
And what else?
And we see diversity and inclusion as a major theme, especially in Europe and North America, where it's been ignored, and whether that's from a gender or nationality or an abilities perspective, I think we need to open ourselves up to really thinking about the talent pool from a very inclusive perspective. And that means geographically, how do we look at emerging economies where I believe you've got huge untapped talent sources, which is where I think in the next 10 years you're just going to see economies like Vietnam, I'm going to list a few, but Indonesia, South America, Central America, India's obviously already a sort of behemoth of talent, but I think that global perspective, that inclusive perspective of how do I build a team with all of the right talents, it's no longer of like who lives in my city and can fit in the office. It's like, how can I think about resourcing from a global perspective and solve my challenges that way.
I think previously we spoke about, also you talk about it needs to be more experiential, right?
Yeah.
So what is changing, and what can we do as companies to be more effective in terms of skills?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the nail on the head, right? Like, how do you develop your people? You can't just give them some videos. You can't give them LinkedIn Learning and say, okay, check box, they're all now learning, because nobody does it and it doesn't work. It's like giving people that are doing driving lessons some videos on driving and then go, okay, off you go, here's a Formula One car. You should be able to do this now. I think you need to dedicate time for experiential learning. So like if it's an hour a week, but it starts with that diagnostic of saying like, well, what do you need to learn for your job? And then how do we get the experts in? How do we get you exercises and activities to do practical, hands-on experiential learning? How do we create a culture of learning within the organization? How do we create connections of expertise within the organization? It's like, actually, if you have, somebody who's in marketing who needs to learn more about sales, don't give them a course on sales, perhaps connect them with somebody in the sales department and say, how can we create these sort of alignments of the knowledge and skills that are in the organization and connect those better.
And now, I mean, to finalize is, so if we look at 10 years ahead, we talk about high performance teams. What is one skill that myself as a leader I need to start developing now that will help me in 10 years, but maybe not many people are aware of it?
I mean, I think it's, as much as we have this technology development, I think we also have they call it the woke generation, which is kind of perhaps not stating it strongly enough how much the inner work of the individual plays a role in this. And I think that that's perhaps forgotten when people say, okay, it's a technology age. Actually, it's also the age of having to do the work on ourselves. It's not okay to be a terrible boss. It's not okay to not communicate, to not empathize with people, to not create an environment that's safe and inclusive. And all of those things, you can only really learn when you reflect. And it's in that self-reflection where I think most of the change happens. So in order for change to happen, I think it's about the inner work and actually saying, kind of, let's give that priority. Let's create space for that in organizations to say, right, what does the individual need to do to improve themselves in order to become a better leader, to become a better manager? And I think that's on all leaders, is to say, how do I create the opportunity for people to grow, for them to have permission to do that self-work, to self-reflect, and to develop into better leaders. That's, I think,
Wow, what a way to end our conversation. I love that. I think this is such a hot topic now. I think we covered, so we understood what's the context, but also we understood for the future. It's a lot about how we make it that learn fast. Yeah. We focus on the people that we have inside, but we make it more experiential so that people learn on the job and learn more. And so thank you so much. I love our conversation.
Thank you, Rodrigo. No, absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And good luck on your with your company. I think you're doing a great job. So just keep going.
Thank you so much. All right, absolute pleasure.